Bloody Sunday, January 30th, 1972, in Derry, Northern Ireland, saw British soldiers open fire on unarmed civilians during a civil rights march. 14 people were killed, marking a pivotal moment in the Troubles. The massacre exposed deep tensions between the Catholic nationalist community and the British state. It fueled ongoing conflict and left a lasting scar on Northern Ireland's collective memory. The search for truth and accountability has been long and arduous. Bloody Sunday remains a powerful reminder of the human cost of conflict. The seeds of Bloody Sunday were sown long before 1972. The 1921 partition of Ireland created Northern Ireland, leaving a legacy of division and resentment. Systemic discrimination against the Catholic nationalist minority fueled discontent and violence. The late 1960s saw a resurgence of civil rights activism, met with resistance and violence. Bloody Sunday became a tragic turning point, further polarizing communities. Historical grievances and social injustice laid the groundwork for the tragic events in Derry. The civil rights movement in Northern Ireland emerged in the late 1960s, a time of significant social and political upheaval across the globe. This movement was not an isolated phenomenon, but part of a broader wave of civil rights struggles that were sweeping through many parts of the world. Inspired by global struggles for equality, the activists in Northern Ireland sought to address the systemic injustices faced by the Catholic nationalist community. Activists demanded equal voting rights, fair housing, and an end to discriminatory practices that had long marginalized their community. They organized marches, sit-ins, and other forms of peaceful protest to draw attention to their cause. One of their key demands was an end to gerrymandering, which had been used to manipulate electoral boundaries and ensure Protestant unionist dominance in local councils. Despite their commitment to non-violence, peaceful protests were often met with violence from loyalist counter-protesters and the Royal Ulster Constabulary. These confrontations sometimes escalated into serious clashes, highlighting the deep divisions within Northern Irish society. Despite intimidation and the threat of violence, the movement persisted. Activists continued to march, organize, and speak out against the injustices they faced, showing remarkable resilience and determination. Figures like John Hume emerged as key leaders, advocating for non-violent resistance and seeking to build bridges between divided communities. Hume's eloquence and commitment to peace made him a respected figure both within Northern Ireland and internationally. The efforts of the civil rights activists brought international attention to the plight of the Catholic nationalist community. Media coverage and solidarity marches around the world helped to amplify their message and put pressure on the British government to address their grievances. The movement exposed deep-seated inequalities and systemic discrimination, paving the way for future peace initiatives. It highlighted the need for significant political and social reforms to create a more just and equitable society. The legacy of the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland continues to inspire social justice activists worldwide. Its lessons on the power of non-violent resistance and the importance of standing up against injustice remain relevant today, as new generations continue the struggle for equality and human rights. On January 30th, 1972, thousands gathered in Derry for a civil rights march against internment without trial. The march was organized by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, aiming to protest the British government's policy of imprisoning people without charge or trial. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope and tension, as people from all walks of life came together to demand justice and equality. As marchers approached a British Army barricade, tensions escalated. The peaceful demonstration quickly turned confrontational, as the marchers were met with a heavily armed military presence. The sight of soldiers in full combat gear only heightened the sense of urgency and fear among the protesters. Soldiers from the 1st Battalion, Parachute Regiment, opened fire on unarmed civilians. The sudden eruption of gunfire sent shockwaves through the crowd, turning a peaceful protest into a scene of chaos and terror. The soldiers claimed they were responding to threats, but eyewitness accounts and later investigations revealed that many of the victims were shot while fleeing or trying to help the wounded. 13 people were killed outright, and another died later from injuries. The victims ranged in age from teenagers to middle-aged adults, each with their own story and dreams. The immediate aftermath saw scenes of unimaginable grief and horror as families and friends searched for their loved ones among the dead and injured. The victims included teenagers, a priest, and bystanders. Father Edward Daly, a local priest, became a symbol of the tragedy as he waved a white handkerchief while trying to help the wounded. His actions were captured in a now iconic photograph that came to represent the senseless violence of that day. The shootings sparked widespread panic and chaos. People ran for their lives, seeking shelter wherever they could find it. The streets of Derry were filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams, and the wailing of sirens as emergency services struggled to cope with the scale of the disaster. Graphic news footage shocked the world, marking a defining moment in the Troubles. The images of Bloody Sunday were broadcast globally, drawing international condemnation and bringing the plight of Northern Ireland to the forefront of world attention. The brutality of the event left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. The massacre fueled outrage and condemnation, escalating the cycle of violence. In the days and weeks that followed, protests and riots erupted across Northern Ireland, further deepening the divide between communities. Bloody Sunday became a rallying cry for those seeking justice and an end to oppression, but it also intensified the conflict, leading to more bloodshed and suffering. The immediate aftermath of Bloody Sunday was marked by shock, grief, and disbelief. The massacre fueled anger and resentment towards the British government and army. The incident became a rallying cry for the IRA and other paramilitary groups. The Widgery Tribunal's perceived whitewash further inflamed tensions. Bloody Sunday deepened divisions, escalated violence, and hardened attitudes. The massacre became a symbol of the conflict's human cost. It underscored the need for understanding and peaceful conflict resolution. The Widgery Tribunal, established to investigate Bloody Sunday, was met with skepticism. The inquiry's proceedings were perceived as biased and unfair. The tribunal's report largely exonerated the soldiers, concluding they acted in self-defense. The report was widely condemned as a whitewash. It further fueled anger and resentment within the Catholic nationalist community. The findings became a major obstacle to the peace process. The families of the victims campaigned tirelessly for a new inquiry, leading to the Saville Inquiry decades later. Bloody Sunday marked a significant turning point, leading to an escalation of violence. The massacre fueled support for the IRA and other paramilitary groups. The cycle of violence and retribution intensified. The British Army's presence increased, further alienating the Catholic nationalist community. The streets of Belfast and Derry became battlegrounds. The escalating violence had a devastating impact on civilian life. The period following Bloody Sunday was a dark chapter in Northern Ireland's history. Despite escalating violence, the seeds of peace began to germinate. Secret talks between governments and political parties laid the groundwork for a peace settlement. Civil society organizations fostered dialogue and reconciliation. Grassroots initiatives challenged narratives of hatred and division. The Good Friday Agreement, signed in 1998, represented a historic breakthrough. It provided a framework for power sharing and addressed legacy issues, including Bloody Sunday. In 1998, British Prime Minister Tony Blair announced the Saville Inquiry into Bloody Sunday. The inquiry, chaired by Lord Saville, was thorough and independent. It heard testimony from hundreds of witnesses and accessed extensive documents. In 2010, the Saville Inquiry published its report, exonerating the victims. The report concluded that soldiers fired without warning on unarmed civilians. Prime Minister David Cameron issued a formal apology on behalf of the British government. The Saville report marked a significant step towards reconciliation in Northern Ireland. Bloody Sunday's legacy is etched into Northern Ireland's collective memory. The event continues to shape political and social discourse. The massacre remains a source of grief and anger for the victims' families. The pursuit of justice has been long and arduous. The Saville Inquiry's exoneration and the British government's apology were significant steps. Bloody Sunday highlights the need for addressing root causes of conflict. The event serves as a cautionary tale about unchecked state violence and the importance of human rights. The quest for justice continues despite the Saville Inquiry's findings. The inquiry, which was one of the most extensive investigations in British history, concluded that the killings were unjustified. However, for many, this was just the beginning of a longer journey. The findings, while significant, did not bring the closure that the victims' families desperately sought. No soldiers have been successfully prosecuted for their role in the massacre. This lack of accountability has been a source of deep frustration and pain for the families. Legal experts argue that the complexities of the legal system, combined with political pressures, have made it incredibly difficult to bring those responsible to justice. Legal challenges face numerous obstacles, including political considerations. The political landscape in Northern Ireland is fraught with tension, and any move towards prosecution is met with resistance from various quarters. This has created a situation where justice seems perpetually out of reach. The pursuit of justice is about acknowledging systemic failures and ensuring such events never happen again. Activists and community leaders emphasize the importance of recognizing the broader context of civil rights abuses and the need for systemic change. It validates the suffering of the victims and their families. For the families, the quest for justice is deeply personal. It is about honoring the memory of their loved ones and ensuring that their suffering is not forgotten. The quest for justice is integral to Northern Ireland's healing process. Reconciliation and healing can only occur when there is a sense of justice and accountability. Community leaders stress that without addressing these past injustices, true peace remains elusive. The family's unwavering commitment to justice serves as an inspiration for a more just and peaceful world. Their resilience and determination highlight the universal struggle for human rights and the enduring hope for a future where such tragedies are never repeated.